Good afternoon. Thanks, Amita, and it's a pleasure for me to come here all the way from Dhaka to join this auspicious occasion. At the very onset, I think it would help just to refresh what brings this whole issue of SDG, MDG, and we're very honored to have the chairman of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council to be with us. As some of you who are familiar with SDG and MDG, you know one of the things that SDG provides for is SDG 17, which is a multi-stakeholder platform, which gives a lot of opportunity to corporate sectors, civil society, others. So there's a sense of ownership of this whole SDG goals. As the respected chairman of the Economic Advisory Council had mentioned, 17 targets, and 2030 is just a little decade away. It's a very ambitious target, and we still have a yawning gap of $2.5 trillion. No one has a clear idea from where these funds will come. So there you see corporates having a very, very important role to play. And many of you who have been to the corporate sectors, Mumbai, New York, you will see most of the corporates like this branding. No matter whether they're active or not, you'll see a lot of SDG logos outside their office. So the challenge is how to transform intent into real actions. So that is something would set in motion the discussion we are going to have today. I'm aware of 40 minutes time, and I'm always given the unpopular tasks to be within time in South Asia, where we love to talk endlessly. So I have taken that honors of being the most unpopular person, end of it, but that much I owe to Amita. Okay, I'm going to do this quick. First, I would ask each of you, since you come for very different sectors, in 3 minutes, give some sectoral insights. Of course, you represent a particular entity, but I would request you go beyond entity, look into your sector. Where do you come in, play your roles in driving forward this SDG and shared value? The next 18 minutes, we would like to have a very informal intra-panel discussion. And last 10 minutes, I would open up to the floor so that you can ask questions. But just to bear in mind, I have 10 minutes for questions. I would like to accommodate at least 5 questions. So your questions has to be within 1 minute. Please don't give background. These ladies and gentlemen are very well aware of the subject line. And I would request each of you to answer within 2 minutes. So let's disprove the notion wrong about South Asia. We can manage time. Okay. I'll go in terms of sectoral priorities, not in terms of who's sitting next to me. Health, as very rightly mentioned by the Honorable Chairman of the Economic Advisory Council, is the most important sector as far as overall economic development concerned. And I'll start with you, Mr. Amal Kelshkar. India has done great in pharmaceutical industry and is the 4th largest pharmaceutical industry in the world. You have a lot of innovations. Many of developing countries, emerging economies tend to gain a lot from many of the high-quality drugs made available by Indian pharmaceutical industry. Now, my request in the initial remarks, in the pharmaceutical industry, looking into this SDGs and shared value, how do you see orienting your operation objectives in a fashion so that many of the good things that has happened in India, for example, in Hyderabad, we know there is this Bharat Biotech, which have done a lot of innovative products, and India has a niche in a lot of other medicine. How do you see the pharmaceutical industry orienting the operation object goal so that it's in more alignment with the shared values and reaching those SDG goals? Starting with you, 3 minutes.
Okay. So you know what I'll do is, rather than just restricting to pharmaceutical industry, I'll touch more upon healthcare as a sector and talk about how one can make an impact. First of all, we firmly believe that if you have to have sustainable way of working, making an inclusive environment and where you make a positive impact on the ecosystem makes a lot of difference. I'll just give one quick example which will probably elucidate the point that I'm trying to convey. I represent a nutrition business and it's a fairly young organization within the larger scheme of things. We're only 10 years old, and we started manufacturing in 2014. And so when we started manufacturing, one of the things that we realized is that if you're to be competitive in India, firstly, you need manufacturing in the space where we operate. But 2 is, accessing raw material was not necessarily easy because for us, one of the ingredients was milk, and you had to depend on farmers. And it's not necessarily a very organized way in terms of how it functions. There are organized part, but there's a large, nearly 50% of it unorganized. And so when you are talking of an organized sector that you're dealing with, you are not necessarily getting the right quality of milk that you're looking for, which is the foundation of producing good nutritious products. So for us, the key thing was how do we be competitive in the marketplace? So what we did was we have partners whom we work with, and one of the vendor development is an important role. So we asked our partners, they know how to access? And we realized, despite being one of the large partners, of course there was knowledge gaps. So we said we'll demonstrate what can be done. What does good look like? Because our expertise comes in nutrition, engineering, understanding how this practices needs to be driven. So we took a cluster. We took 10 towns in the state of Maharashtra, 10 villages. We covered nearly 1,500 farmers. And we went and drove three things. One, we drove training in terms of feed fodder, animal care, and so on and so forth. So right training. Two, we created infrastructure because milk, having right infrastructure so that it's stored correctly, transported correctly becomes important. Otherwise, it's obviously loses value. And the third is you need to create a very transparent pricing system, where the farmers are compensated for the right right quality of milk, because there should be some incentive for them. And so we did that, and what we observed is in the 10 villages, so we had clearly monitored those who are part of the program, those who are not part of the program. So those who are part of the program, 1 year down the line, we saw that not only the milk production doubled, they were able to produce high-quality milk. Two, their revenue doubled. And their cost will actually remain the same. So their net revenue that they got actually doubled. And it made these kind of things make a lot of difference to the lives of farmers. So what we accomplished, when we demonstrated, so the cluster we looked at and say, okay, this is how you do it. Now, our partner sees a value in that and says, okay, how do you make it stick? Because, we make it in a habit, how do you make it stick? But two, they say, okay, you demonstrated to us in 10 villages, we'll take it to 200. And that's where you create scale, and that's where you create impact. So the way I see it is, we can, thrive in a very synergistic way, and there are ways to make a positive impact while making the environment inclusive.
I'll hold you by the milk when I come to the panel discussion.
Absolutely.
You started with milk. Logical progression, food security, and I would ask Mr. Himanshu Jain. As you know, the Indian government has this Food Security Act, which the Food Security Act, which basically is supposed to make 800 million people access to subsidized food product. And another thing that has happened beyond wheat and rice, other products like maize and other have also come, which is expected to boost product. So in terms of Food Security Act, how do you think, given government's active policy of supporting access to food, how that is placed into the broader picture of sustainable development goals? And how do you see from the corporate side that initiative can be plugged in so that this becomes a good example of SDG 17 supporting SDG 8, 9, 10.
Thank you. I represent Indian hotels. That's where I could bring in a bit of a corporate perspective into this. I give two examples, to talk about the food security and as to how do we make sure that, we make sure that the shared values are brought to life. The first example, I'm going to talk about what we do and also, talk about as to, what can be done further as an industry or as a particular cluster. One thing we do very well is creating employment. It's called employability is what we say. It is the skill development part of it. It may not be directly related to the Food Security Act of it has nothing to do with the legislation per se. But, our belief is that when we are in a particular business, we are in hospitality. And for hospitality, the front end services is everything. The frontline staff make or break the business. Given that scenario, how do we make sure that we create the right kind of skills at the front line? It is not just for our organization, it is for the entire industry is what we look at. And when we talk about it, what we have done is, as part of our Tata affirmative action, it is for the benefit of marginalized sections. So how do we create more employability? How do we make sure that we put our focus on skill building is what we focus upon. So in partnership with various social impact organizations, we have created certain clusters and then started developing the skills of marginalized sections of people from those regions. So say, for example, it is Jammu and Kashmir, Nagaland, Tripura, Uttarakhand, or where we have our Taj safaris, in those forests, in and around those forests. So we have set up these centers, and so that the basic objective is to, creating value so that, they'll be joining our organization and also joining other organizations in the industry. I'm sure that this has nothing to do with the government legislation around the Food Security Act. But, I think that, somewhere the employability part of it, would lead to providing the basic amenities, the basic requirements of life. This is one example I could quote. The other example, as customers of our hotels, you all would have experienced various facilities and amenities. Let's say, for example, the laundry bags in the rooms or the newspaper bags in the rooms or the slipper bags. You would have seen the chef cabs, and all these, we have been developing and nurturing certain social impact groups. We work with over 30 social impact groups, and we source these final products from these social impact groups. And all these social impact groups are run by either women or physically challenged people or socially marginalized communities. I do not know if I have answered your question directly or not, but these two things would come to my mind when we talk about shared value creation and as to how we could gain as a corporate and how we could provide value for these sections of our societies and communities.
No, thank you. No, Amanda, I'll come to you. One of the things he mentioned, also this training and human capital component. So going forward, in terms of human capacity development, which is one of the very major factors, particularly developing countries like India, which has 1 billion plus population. Now, government has limited resources, so do corporates. So as an expert in this sector, if I have to ask you, in terms of prioritization, strategically, which are some of the key areas in capacity development which you think deserves importance in terms of making that important connect between economic growth, innovation, and removing economic inequality? It's a tall order, but in 3 minutes, I would like to have your insights. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, we'll solve that right now. So my name is Amanda MacArthur. I am the Chief Program Officer at an organization called Pixera Global. We are a global organization. We have offices here in India, and our mission is to reinvent how the public, private, and social sectors engage to solve complex global challenges. So SDG 17 is really at the heart of everything that we do. And a lot of what we do is work with the private sector to help them create strategies and implement programs that align their philanthropic or their CSR activities with their business strategies so that they aren't two separate things, that they are mutually beneficial and multiplying each other's impact. One of the ways that we do that is by working with a number of multinational corporations on programs that we call global pro bono. So these are programs that use the human capital, invest the human capital of the private sector into the social sector through short-term pro bono, so free to the user, consulting projects that use their professional expertise to drive forward the capacity of these social sector organizations or government or educational institutions. One of the areas that we do a huge amount of work in, because it is so critical to the private sector, is this idea of workforce development. How do we create the workforce to of tomorrow, especially in a country like India, where you have this huge number of youth coming up who need to have the skills and the resources and the expertise to compete in a economy that has dramatically transformed over the past 30 years and will continue to dramatically transform. Are they coming out of school ready to do that? And the answer is no. And unfortunately, the answer is not no just here in India. The answer is no in many parts of the world, the United States included. And so what we have done is work with a number of our private sector partners, including here in India with JP Morgan Chase, with SAP, with IBM, with John Deere, on programs that use their capacity to build the capacity of organizations that are working in this education space to drive forward educational transformation here in India, but at the same time, building the capacity of their current employees by asking them to use their professional skills in a different way, by asking them to be more thoughtful about how they interact with the social sector, and by asking them to switch their perspective a little. So what you really get from that ability to switch your perspective is this ability to look at the world differently and then come back and create products and services that will hopefully address some of these challenges that you're seeing. So it's really, it's not just a win-win, it's kind of a win-win-win. The social sector organizations benefit from this influx of expertise that would likely be unaffordable without the pro bono aspect. The companies get this kind of unmatched experiential learning experience for their top performing employees. The best way to teach someone something new is to take them out of their environment and ask them to perform at a very high level very quickly. That's what our programs do. And then also for the employees, this is a transformational experience for them. They are seeing the world differently than they have before. And we see this with programs that take people from country to country, but also with programs, for example, here internal to India, where we are asking people who perhaps live relatively elite lives to work in communities that they might not have daily access to. So I think one of the ways that we can really help this transformation is to continue to have these cross-sector interactions. There's so much innovation that can come out of the private sector into the social sector. There's so much process that they bring to the table, and just creating these connections is what needs to happen more and more. And I think the private sector sees that increasingly, and so does the social sector. So there's just huge opportunity for the space to really grow and to be kind of a standard bearer for how you both develop your existing talent, but also create a pathway for new talent to come into your organization.
Thank you, Amanda. Now I'll come to Mr. Ganesh. Looking into your sector, in the Middle East we have seen there was this financial technology startup boom, but in certain cases that led to more inequality. Now coming to India, I mean, on one hand, there are a lot of social entrepreneurs, startups, even there are many people sitting in the audience I've met in the lunch, so they are out there. So what are some of the things, for example, what are some of the large-scale value addition that can happen in the social space that can drive forward the SDG and cluster that we're talking about and the shared common values? I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Let me just give you a background. I mean, many of you know me in this audience, but I ran two very successful private sector, public listed companies, AppTech and then Zensar Technologies, where we did enormous work in improving shareholder value, profitability. And I think towards the end of my tenure running this company, Zensar, the biggest value we got was by focusing on what we call the triple bottom line, which is not just profits, but profits, people, and planet. And we discovered that that actually was the magic mantra to make us even more successful. So when I finished my corporate career 3 years ago, we did a very deep analysis of where could we make large-scale impact happen on the country. And the problem then, as it is now, was the lack of jobs, because we were just not skilling people fast enough, and people were not getting the kind of jobs or being in the kind of entrepreneurship that they wanted to do. And we said, look, instead of trying to solve the problems of the world, let's solve the problems of the city I live in, which is called Pune. And in Pune, we said, let's identify one cluster, which is the Pune Municipal Corporation, and which is really, if you look at it, 15 municipal wards. And coming from a very tech background, we said, look, we can't do anything unless we baseline. So in those 15 municipal wards, we know every family in that ward, 35% live in the slums. And we first said, let's figure out where the problem is. The problems were predictable. Bad school education, the municipal schools, many of them were terrible. Very bad skilling initiatives, because most of us look at skills from a position of privilege. We feel we are doing the slum child a favor by offering him a skills program, and in our superior wisdom, we will decide what he or she should do. The third, of course, was Prime Minister Modi had talked Digital India, and we said, what is the level of digital literacy in this city? Pune is a very IT manufacturing intensive city, but we found that digital literacy was poor. Then we addressed the big problem that Vivek Debroy talked about, the problem of corruption. And we said, if we go to the municipal corporation and say, hey, we want to do all this great stuff, the municipal corporation will float a tender, it will go through the cheapest provider, and of course the quality will go down the toilet. So we said, let's go talk to the municipal commissioner and let him come up with a solution. And we had this outstanding municipal commissioner, a guy called Kunal Kumar, who's now, by the way, the Mission Director, Smart Cities, Government of India. And Kunal said, let's build this friction-free, non-corruptible environment. He said, you give me the specifications of the best skill centers, the best model schools, the best digital literacy centers, the best digital literacy-enabled buses that you want, and we will do it for you to the best of international standards. We were amazed. So we got the best architect in town and gave him those designs. He said, we'll do it. It's nothing to do with you guys. I mean, I'm just taking maybe 50 institutions in the city and really making them international. And then, by the way, it's available to you. Now you go get money from the corporate sector, from philanthropists, from everybody else, and you convert these institutions to digital literacy centers and better schools and better everything else. Absolutely fabulous model, and I give full credit to the government. Today, if you look at me, we've identified 250,000 people whose lives we have to transform, plus about 200,000 kids. We're today working in 70 out of the 230 municipal schools. We are running 27 digital literacy centers, including buses. And the good news is that we're doing it with raising corporates. I mean, corporates are absolutely willing to fund us. All the multinationals in Pune are saying, hey, we have no risk of being caught by corruption with government because we're only giving you the money. And you don't pay the government anything, the government doesn't pay you anything. All CapEx by government, all OpEx by here. And so we're getting the government, the corporate sector, civil society, and the citizens of Pune to really benefit. And to my mind, that model, in fact, we just got the Prime Minister's award across all the smart cities for being the most innovative, technology-enabled model for social development. And we're proud of that because I believe therein lies the opportunity. In fact, today I also chair an entity called Social Venture Partners India. And SVP International was started in Seattle. And today we work in 14 countries and 62 cities around the world, a lot of them in the US. And each one has chosen a cluster methodology. So Portland, for instance, early education. If you go to Connecticut, they've chosen reintroduction of manufacturing by working with the community colleges. In India, we've chosen livelihoods. So the point I'm making is, if you identify an agenda, do baselining, and get the ecosystem to work together, any kind of change at whatever scale can happen.
Ecosystem. A good point of departure for me. Let me connect the dotted lines of ecosystem. I'll start with you. You mentioned about the hospitality industry. You gave some examples how you're trying to, through some internal procurement. If I were to ask you, gentleman sitting next to you, that if you were to source your hotel a good chunk of food products from him, what are some of the 2-3 things he has to do to qualify in your overall social responsibility? Then I'm going to bounce back to Amanda, that if Amanda is to be hired, fundamental change is change in mindset. I'll be very blunt about it. A lot of this SDG agenda is about corporates. The common complaint that comes, most are aligned to their own particular interests, not the broader socio-economic agenda. So then I'll come to Amanda, how she would contribute in the mindset. And of course, in the logical order, how would you put things together? Quick, 2 minutes each.
No, it's a very tough question. I think that, he can answer that question.
He's getting
better.
business.
Yeah, no. But from my perspective, what I talked about was from my company perspective.
I want to push the boundaries.
No, yeah. But when you look at hospitality industry, there are several companies within the hospitality industry. When we talk about employability or, sourcing various products from these people I talked about, so, it could be a cluster. Entire hospitality group can do it together. So that the frontline staff I was talking about, it's not just for one organization per se. It's for several organizations within the same industry. How can we come together, all the organizations within that particular industry?
What would be the two shared values? Quick. So that someone like him can come in.
Yeah, I think that, the two examples I talked about, employability is one, and then sourcing, making them partners in the supply chain is the second one.
How would you do that?
One is obviously connecting back to what we do in terms of, at the end of the day, if he's my customer, I need to ensure that I provide value to him. Yeah. At the same time, it also makes a value to whom we are sourcing from, and in this case, the example that I gave you, the farmers, right? So obviously, educating them in terms of what impact that we make and why sourcing from us not only assures the right quality that they get so that they can ensure quality for their clients, but also see the value in terms of how impact that sourcing through us makes on the wider society. So I think just one is about clearly driving awareness. The second point was on, sorry, I missed, what was the second point? Supply chain. Yeah, the supply chain, I think, the scale that we operate with, in our industry, and we are one of the largest healthcare company in India, the scale that we operate in, we bring in a whole lot of skills in terms of efficiencies in how we engage even right to the last mile, every individual who is connected with this. There involves a lot of intensity in training, education, and making them part of the process so that they see what value that they're adding. And I think they can probably take best practices and look at how we build that up.
Amanda, we hear a lot about training education, but I think one of the things which I alluded to, by and large, many of us believe the fundamental change in mindset in corporate still has to happen. So there are a lot of good intent. So adding on to what these two gentlemen had said, had I hired you as an external expert, beyond training capacity, how do make the mindset change? What would be two key things you would have done?
Well, I mean, I think one aspect of it is to just, you have to accept the fact to some extent that a business is going to operate in the space that makes sense for it as a business, and that's okay. One of the things that is so great, I think, about the Sustainable Development Goals is how interconnected they are, and that there really is opportunity for this multifactorial impact across them. As far as changing the mindset of the private sector, I think it's happening, but it's happening slowly, and it really has to do with as companies are increasingly seeing financial return on their social investments, and as they are asking their CSR teams to demonstrate that impact, both the social impact and the return on investment. So that's actually a space that we are working increasingly in, is helping them to demonstrate that.
What's the second one?
Can you repeat the question?
Two key things. If you have one, that's fine.
No, sorry, I'm still a little jet lagged. I just got in at 3 a.m. this morning.
It's supposed to be rapid fire round. It's okay.
I think the other thing is to increasingly integrate your social impact strategy into your business, right? So one is how can your business inform your social impact strategy, and the reverse is how can your social impact strategy inform your business. And so there are easy ways to do that. Have a global pro bono program that brings your employees out into the community and asks them to use their skills to impact social change. The other part of it is how can you use your social impact programs as a laboratory, as a way to seek out new markets, as a way to more efficiently test new products, or to gain access, market knowledge, understanding of communities that you perhaps might be underserved. So really, the most important thing I think here is opening up that dialogue between your business units and your social responsibility units. They've been pretty siloed to date. What I think you're going to increasingly see and should increasingly see are much more interactive communications across the two.
So 3 C's: communication, coordination, community. So
yes.
So over to you. As the national award winner, are you convinced on the shared value these three persons have come up? Or is there anything they've missed out? I wanted to use this very quick live example so that the audience has the advantage how these things come together. Yes.
No, I think it's absolutely valid. And what Amanda said right at the end, which is that most organizations would like to see some impact that they can measure, which is extremely important. And I would think, like what we're trying to do in Social Venture Partners, we're now working with 43 nonprofits, and we expect to expand that to 100 in India. And we're actually categorizing these people and telling organizations that, look, you want to come into the agriculture, NGO space, healthcare, waste management, livelihood, we can actually curate opportunities for you where you can invest. Not only that, we can actually tell you that, look, by volunteering, which you mentioned, the kind of impact that you need to open up new markets, our NGOs or our nonprofits, I mean, if you're helping them with capacity building like we do in Mumbai, or actual impact on the ground like we do in Bangalore, we can actually show you the kind of impact and get your volunteers to participate in that. So I think it's important. I completely agree with what Amanda said, that look, I mean, you can't just throw money into the air and say that, look, I'm doing good for society. You will want some measurables. Your board committees of CSR will ask for outcomes. And I think it's also our responsibility, people like us who are intermediaries with the social sector, and the social sector itself. I mean, I was speaking in the Ashoka Fellows Conference a month ago in Delhi, and I think the kind of passion that the Ashoka Fellows bring to the table is amazing. What is our responsibility as people from the corporate sector or even government is to channelize that energy and make it aligned to national goals as well as the corporate goals who might try to fund you. Only then can we build this virtuous cycle of everybody participating in social development.
Thank you. At this stage, I would like to open it to the floor. As I said, please keep your questions within 1 minute, if not less. And by the same token, just briefly introduce yourself. And if you want that to be answered by a specific panelist, feel free to suggest that. Otherwise, I'll have to decide. So please kindly raise your hand if you want to ask any question. I have seen a lot of people during lunch, civil society and NGOs who may have a lot of common areas of interest with the panel. So feel free to raise your hands. And please keep your questions within 1 minute, and by the same token, answers within 2 minutes. So please, raise your hand, please. Is someone... If you're loud enough, you can do it without a microphone. Would you please just introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Richa, and I'm from L&T Financial Services. I head the CSR. As an organization, when we are trying to implement the shared value initiatives, you have to work, Amanda, as you rightly said, very closely with the business team. Now, typically, the economic value side, it takes time for it to happen. How do you, any of you can answer, as professionals, convince the business team to stay invested for minimum number of years so that they can see the economic value coming?
Yeah, we hear that a lot. It's really challenging, right? Because social change doesn't happen on a quarterly reporting schedule, whereas that's how businesses are used to reporting. So first of all, it's having that conversation up front and saying, this, we might not see this immediately, but also it's looking at what are the interim impacts, outputs that you can report on and show how they are contributing to the outcomes that you are anticipating. And I think a lot of that has to do with being really thoughtful about how you structure your programs and more importantly, how you structure the measurement of your programs. And then just opening up that communication dialogue as much as possible.
I'll just say that it needs commitment from the leadership. If the leadership is commitment, then people down the line will probably follow. Because not everyone that you engage with may have a view in terms of long term. But if that is actually illustrated, that if you break it down, but you still need a strong commitment from leadership to go through that process of 2 years, 3 years from a baseline to see the output.
Good start. We managed 1 question, 2 answers within less than 2 minutes. So we are on the right track. Please. If you would please rise so that everyone can see you. Yeah.
David Wilcox. Theory is great. India has actual best scale examples that aren't clustering. So 3. India built Amul, a $5 billion producer-owned cooperative. They haven't built another one for 60 years. We need a cluster to build a Mill 2, a Mill 3, a Mill 4. India has great ministries who've standardized on phenomenal programs. 10 states have invited programs in. There's not a cluster to get the companies to collaborate with the states to deploy their CSR against the programs the states know will work. The companies want to go do something that they own. So there's 2 clusters that need to be built where we actually have the examples on the ground working, and we haven't built those clusters. So how do we focus on actually building the clusters that we already know could be scaled? We could sell $200 million a year to IKEA from women manufacturing out of villages because they're already buying 2 million and they want to buy 200 million. Why can't we build the clusters to actually do what they want?
Thank you. Mr. Ganesh, yeah, I know, yeah.
No, actually you're right that Amul is probably the most celebrated example of a cluster. But if you look at, I'll give you 3 examples. I mean, you look at Mandeshi, for instance, I mean, which is out of a place called Satara in this state. Mandeshi is doing phenomenal work. And what this lady Chetna Gala has done is actually integrate, they've even got a Mandeshi radio in the little town, and there are multiple women working together, right from goat farming to other rural occupations. Take Seva, started by Magsaysay Award winner Ila Ben Bhatt. And we've spent a lot of time with Seva, and what they're doing is miraculous. Because there's lots of discipline, they've got women artisans, not just in the state of Gujarat, but all over making that happen. What they need is more support, and they're not the most professional in terms of systems and information, but surely something worth supporting. The third one we've just started supporting in Social Venture Partners is an entity called Vritti. It's in Bangalore. And Vritti actually started 2 years ago with the objective of taking marginalized farmers who make a livelihood of not more than 7,500 rupees per month. They've taken them up to 18,000 and they're taking them up to 21,000. And just by building the farming community, sharing best practices, having a knowledge management system. So I think you're right. We haven't seen something of the scale of Amul yet, but there's a lot of hope that I have as an optimist in the social sector that we will see this happening. And I think with enough support from Abbott and the Taj Group and you, I think we need to get corporates aligned to certain verticals and horizontals and to make that happen. That's the way I would see it happen.
On the back, please.
Hi, my name is Ganesh. I'm from Glenmark Foundation. My question is regarding the current ecosystem in India with the CSR laws. Is encouraging, whether it is encouraging the philanthropic activity than the social investment. What is your take on that? Thank you.
Mr. Mahanshi.
So I think you are specifically referring to the 2% legislation, you know, the Companies Act change that was made a few years back. I think, you know, from my perspective, it gives a sort of a framework. It is good from my perspective, whatever I have seen of it. I think that, you know, it puts a sort of a responsibility on the corporates, that's number one. And then the second thing is, you know, it also enables them to follow a particular pattern or a framework and do certain things which would be beneficial to the community. And I think that, you know, there could be opportunities to improve upon it, on whatever changes that have been made in the legislation. But I think that I look at it positively.
My question was pertaining to the market strategies and...
We have run out of time. I think I have to... Thank you for your question.
Okay, thank you.
I think all of you will agree that within the short time, we had quite focused, punchy, incisive discussion. Would you please join me to give a round of applause to the wonderful panel I have the privilege to moderate. And thanks to each and all of you for the wonderful contribution. And thanks for being with us. Your participation made it all the more value additive. Thank you so much.